Okay, so once we know what kind of AML risk a customer poses, that will then translate into what level of due diligence that we would do. So for a normal customer without any high risk indicator, then standard due diligence would apply. We would need to understand and verify some basic information about the customer, their name, their nationality, their occupation, where they live, what they do. And then, if a customer, for whatever reason, becomes a higher risk, then we would need to understand a bit more. The most important element of enhanced due diligence when a customer is higher risk is the source of wealth and source of funds information that we need to acquire. So to put it in simple terms, source of funds means physically where the money is coming from. Is it what channel it's coming from? Is it from a bank account? Is it from a premium financing? Is it being paid in cash, paid in check, and where is it exactly coming from? Then source of wealth is the one that's more important and more tricky. So that, as I mentioned before, means where the customer has accumulated the money that they have. So how did they make it? What is it that they have done in their past that has brought them so much success and wealth? And on a personal note, can they share it with us? Because then we can learn from that. But on the more serious note, every customer will be different, and there is no straightforward answer to what kinds of documents we might need in order to validate that that is how the customer has made their money. There are a few typical examples, and let me take you through those. And I'll also give you examples of what kinds of documents that we've seen that can support that that's where their source of wealth came from. So let's start off with one of the most typical examples of how people make their money is through employment or professional means. Sorry. So usually the kinds of information documents that we can get to validate that a person is making that amount of money is through a payslip that they receive from their employer. It could also be a letter from their employer on the company's letterhead signed by their HR to confirm that that person is their employee and that person makes so-and-so amount of money on a regular basis. And it could also detail what kind of maybe commission they get or bonus that they receive. And also a bank statement could show us how much the amount of money that the customer is making, but it would have to have that line in the bank statement to show that the employer is indeed regularly paying the customer a certain amount of money, which is their salary. In addition to that, a tax return is also something that could show how much income a person has on a yearly basis, and that could substantiate how much they are making. So these are some examples of employment or professional income verification. Then there's also business. A customer could own their own business and make money from that. So in order to substantiate how much money they make, they could also show us the audited tax returns, audited financials for the company, the tax return for the company to show how much the company is earning, and if the customer is a shareholder, then how much dividends they are receiving through their shareholding, through their ownership. Um, Also, if they sell their business, then a sale document to show that it was indeed sold and the person received a certain amount of money for that sale. Then there are also typically some non-financial assets that a customer can have that can contribute to their source of wealth. So, for example, some property, real estate, cars, or boats that a customer could sell. So sales documents for that as well would be relevant, or a letter from a solicitor, an independent solicitor that shows the sale. Or if they're not selling, then some sort of independent valuation report could also be relevant to show the worth of that non-financial asset. And lastly, one of the most typical examples is for customers to receive an inheritance or gift from a wealthy father or a wealthy uncle or aunt. Then the documents that could support that are a grant of probate together with the will. Or for gifts, then a letter from a solicitor showing that that is indeed the amount of money that they have received for a gift. With gifts, I think we'd have to understand a little bit more as to why they are receiving that gift and what is the connection to the person that's giving the gift, especially if it's not a relative or someone that is an obvious connection. So these are the main kinds of documents and the main examples that we've seen for source of wealth. And maybe to share with you as well some of the challenges that we've seen when it comes to source of wealth documents is firstly that sometimes the documents that are provided do not actually show how the money has been obtained or accumulated. So one of the examples that I mentioned before for someone who's employed would be a bank statement that shows their regular income. That is an acceptable proof of the source of wealth. But we've seen in the past maybe some submissions of a bank statement or an excerpt of a bank statement that doesn't actually show or have that line in that document of the income that was provided by the employer. So it's not actually addressing the matter at hand. It was a bank statement showing some outgoing transactions or some purchases. So it's also good to understand why it is that we're asking for these documents. And that's what I've been trying to reiterate throughout this presentation, and hopefully that's making it more clear now as to why we're asking for the documents, because we need to understand where the money has been coming from. So that should hopefully help in the future when you receive documents from the customer, that you can check to see if it does actually address this matter. Another challenge that we sometimes face is that sometimes documents cannot be obtained. And there might be valid reasons for that. If there is such a case, and it should be very rare though, and we should have a really good reason to determine why we could not receive that, some supporting evidence. The important things to note if you ever need to ask for an exception is make sure that you complete a detailed customer background report. I believe that you've covered this in the past few days, and one of the key elements of that is also to write down and explain how the customer has made their money through whatever it is that they have done in the past. One bad example is just to write to the AML team and say, please can you waive this document, without providing any background or any customer background report. Another important thing is for us to document that we did try to obtain whatever document it is that we were looking for, and the reasons why the customer was not able to provide it. In these cases, unfortunately, it would not be enough to say that the customer did not want to provide, or they said that other insurance companies haven't asked for that. It's important that you explain to the customer why it is that we do require this. And if they are very reluctant to give us documents to support their source of wealth, then that in itself is potentially a concern and a red flag to make us suspicious that there could be something not fully right. And I'll be covering that in the next segment as to what to do when you encounter suspicions. And finally, if there is an exceptional case, then it's also important to help explain why it is that even though the customer could not provide a certain document, why it's still plausible and that that is indeed the way that they have made their money. So I think that these are the key parts that if you understand, and hopefully you do now after listening to me for the past half an hour, what it is that AML risks are, then you can anticipate them. And if you can provide a good background and a good analysis, knowing in the back of your mind what are the risks that need to be addressed, then the AML team can also turn this around much quicker, because we won't need to do our own additional analysis and go back and forth asking for more and more questions, but we can straight away send it to the appropriate senior managers for approval and acceptance. So I think that was the key bits that I wanted to cover for this segment. And next I'll talk about what to do if you come across something that is suspicious.